You've never actually heard your own voice, not clearly, not without interference. What you think is your inner voice, the one narrating your choices, judging your work, telling you what's safe and what's too much. That voice has an accent that doesn't belong to you. It speaks in someone else's rhythm. It carries someone else's fear, and you've been obeying it your entire life, thinking it was yours. This isn't about low confidence or caring too much about what people think. That framing is shallow, and it's wrong. What's actually happening is architectural. Someone else's evaluation system got installed in your brain before you had the capacity to refuse it, and it's been running in the background ever since, disguised as your own judgment. This video is going to show you exactly how that installation happened, why your brain preserves it even when it hurts you, and the single precise move that begins to separate their voice from yours. Not in theory, tonight. If this is the first video of ours you've found, you should know what this channel does. We don't do motivation. We show you how your mind actually works so you can build a better one on purpose. If that's useful to you, stay. Here's the explanation you've probably been carrying. You think other people's opinions affect you because you're insecure. You think if you just believed in yourself more, liked yourself more, had a little more self-esteem, those voices would quiet down. So you've tried affirmations. You've tried not caring. You've tried the rational approach where you remind yourself that their opinion doesn't matter. And none of it worked for more than a few hours. The reason none of it worked is that you were treating a structural problem with a surface intervention. You were trying to override a voice that isn't stored in your beliefs. It's stored in your nervous system. The problem isn't that you care too much about what people think. The problem is that a specific person's evaluative framework got wired into the way you process your own worth. And you can't just think your way out of wiring. Telling yourself to stop caring about their opinion is like telling yourself to stop flinching when someone throws a ball at your face. Flinching isn't a decision, it's a circuit. And the circuit you're dealing with was built before you could spell your own name. Think of it like this. Imagine you grew up in a house where the thermostat was always set by someone else. You never touched it. You didn't even know it was adjustable. For years, whatever temperature they chose became your normal. Too cold? That's just how rooms feel. Too hot? You assumed everyone was sweating. You never questioned it because you never had a reference point for what your own comfortable temperature would be. Now imagine you move out, get your own place, and you still set the thermostat to the same number. Not because you chose it, because it's the only setting, you know. That's what happened with the voice in your head that evaluates you. Developmental psychologists call this process internalization, and it's one of the most powerful things your brain does in the first decade of your life. Between roughly ages 2 and 12, your brain is not just learning facts about the world. It's learning who you are by absorbing how the people around you respond to you. Their facial expressions, their tone, their silence, their approval, their disappointment. All of it gets encoded not as memories you can replay, but as felt patterns that shape how you evaluate yourself going forward. The neuroscience here is specific. Your prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for self-evaluation and decision-making, doesn't fully mature until your mid-20s. But the emotional circuitry in your limbic system, particularly the amygdala, is online from birth. So here's what happens. A child receives a critical response from a caregiver or authority figure, and the emotional weight of that response gets stamped into the nervous system long before the rational brain is developed enough to evaluate whether that response was accurate, fair, or even about the child at all. The feeling gets stored. The context doesn't. This is why you can be 30 years old, standing in a boardroom with evidence that you're competent, and still feel a wave of dread when someone questions your idea. The dread isn't coming from the boardroom. It's coming from a circuit that was built in a kitchen when you were 7. The amygdala doesn't time-stamp its data. It just fires. And when it fires, it doesn't say, "This is an old pattern." It says, "You're in danger. You're wrong. You're about to be exposed." Researchers at UCLA Social Cognitive Neuroscience Lab have shown that social rejection activates the same neural regions as physical pain, specifically the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula. Your brain literally processes someone's disapproval the same way it processes a burn. Not metaphorically, structurally. So when someone's opinion hits you harder than it logically should, your brain isn't being dramatic. It's responding to a threat signal that was calibrated decades ago, in a context where disapproval from a caregiver genuinely could mean danger. Here's where it gets more precise. The voice you carry isn't a recording of what someone said. It's a model. Your brain, and its extraordinary efficiency, didn't just store individual moments of criticism or judgment. It built a predictive model of that person's evaluative patterns and installed it as a subroutine. You don't need that person in the room anymore. You don't need them alive. You don't even need to remember specific things they said. The model runs on its own. It predicts what they would say about your choice, your body, your ambition, your silence, your risk. And it delivers that prediction with the full emotional weight of the original relationship. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher born into slavery 2,000 years ago, said something that cuts directly to the center of this. He said, "It is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things." For centuries, people read that as advice to think differently. But what Epictetus was actually identifying, long before neuroscience could see it on a scan, was the existence of an intermediary layer between reality and your response. The layer where someone else's judgment sits disguised as your own perception. He wasn't saying stop caring. He was saying notice that the judgment you're reacting to might not be yours. That's the mechanism. You don't have a self-esteem problem. You have an attribution problem. You feel something, it feels like it comes from you, so you assume it is you, but it's not. It's a model of someone else running a simulation inside your head, and you've been mistaking its output for your own conclusions. Now look at your life through this lens. Think about the last time you held back from saying something you believed, not because you reasoned your way to silence, but because something inside you clenched, a tightness in the chest, a flash of a face, a wordless sense that you'd be punished for it. You probably labeled that feeling as anxiety or self-doubt. But what if it was neither? What if it was the model running its prediction, telling you what someone who isn't even in the room would think? There are two traps most people fall into once they start to sense this pattern. The first trap is performance. You figure out what the internalized voice approves of, and you build your entire life around earning its silence. You don't make choices, you make offerings. Every decision runs through the filter of would they approve, and the ones that pass become your identity. The problem isn't that these choices are always bad. Some of them look impressive from the outside. The problem is they aren't yours. You can spend 40 years being successful on someone else's terms and still feel hollow at the end of every day because the person living your life isn't you. It's their model of who you should be. The second trap is rebellion. You identify the voice, you resent it, and you do the opposite of everything it says, purely because it said it. This feels like freedom. It feels like you're finally choosing for yourself. But reaction is just obedience in the other direction. If every choice you make is a response to their voice is still the center of your operating system. You haven't removed the thermostat. You've just set it to the opposite number out of spite, and you're still not the one deciding what temperature you actually want. The narrow path between these two traps is neither obedience nor rebellion. It's authorship. And authorship requires something very specific. It requires you to feel the voice arise and, instead of reacting to its content, recognize its source. This is where things change, not in theory, in practice, in what you do tonight before you sleep. Here's the move. It's called source tagging, and it takes less than 3 minutes. The next time you feel a wave of self-judgment, hesitation, or shame about a decision you're making or considering, you don't try to push through it. You don't argue with it. You don't affirm your way past it. You stop and you ask one question. Whose voice is this? Not philosophically, specifically. You let the feeling be there and you trace it. You ask, who first made me feel this way about this kind of choice? Who would disapprove of this? Whose face just flickered behind that tightness in my chest? You're not analyzing, you're locating. There's a difference. When you identify the source, you say it. Out loud if you can, silently if you must. You say, that's not mine. That's theirs. That specific sentence is doing something precise at the neurological level. It's activating your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for cognitive reappraisal, and it's creating a separation between the emotional signal from the limbic system and the identity you assign to it. Research in effective neuroscience calls this affect labeling, and it's been shown to reduce amygdala reactivity in real time. You're not suppressing the feeling. You're reclassifying it. You're moving it from the category of this is me to the category of this is a pattern I inherited. That reclassification, done repeatedly, begins to weaken the circuit. Not overnight. But the weakening starts the first time you do it with genuine specificity. You don't need to forgive the person. You don't need to understand why they installed what they installed. You don't need a therapy session or a journal or a weekend retreat. You need to catch the voice in the act and tag it. That's it. That's the move. And you can make it tonight. Every time you do this, you are doing something that nobody did for you when you were young. You are standing between the judgment and your identity and saying, I'll decide what this means. You're not removing the thermostat. You're putting your hand on it for the first time. This is not about becoming someone who doesn't care what anyone thinks. That person doesn't exist, and if they did, you wouldn't want to be them. Connection matters, feedback matters. But there's a difference between hearing someone's perspective and being colonized by it. There's a difference between listening and being lived by. The voice you've been carrying was never yours. It was handed to you by someone who probably didn't know they were handing it to you. It was sealed in place by a brain that was too young to question it. And it's been running your decisions, your risks, your silence, your smallness ever since. Not because you're weak, because the installation happened before you had any defenses at all, but you have defenses now. You have a prefrontal cortex that works. You have language. You have the ability to locate a feeling and name its source. That's not a small thing. That's the thing. You're not trying to silence anyone. You're learning to hear yourself for the first time. The question was never, why do I care so much about what other people think? The real question, the one underneath all of it, is simpler and harder and infinitely more worth asking. When the room is empty and every borrowed voice goes quiet, what do you actually believe about yourself? Start there. That's yours.